The rain drizzled softly over Hongdae's narrow streets, turning the neon lights into streaks of color that danced across puddles. Inside a small, dimly lit bar tucked between two convenience stores, laughter mixed with the sound of glass bottles and K-indie music humming from an old speaker. It was the kind of place where strangers came to forget, the noise louder than their worries, the air thick with smoke and secrets. Behind the counter moved Ji-eun, her hair neatly tied, her white shirt perfectly pressed, though the fabric had long lost its shine. She moved quietly, bowing politely to customers, her smile small but genuine. She never lingered in conversations, never drew attention. There was something about her presence, calm, steady, like someone who had learned how to survive storms without showing the scars. Every night was the same rhythm: pour, serve, clean, repeat. Some customers joked with her, some ignored her completely, but she never seemed to mind. Her kindness wasn't loud, yet it softened even the roughest tempers after a few drinks. No one really knew her story, and no one ever asked. To most, she was just another face in Seoul's endless crowd, the kind of person who blended into the background until something made her impossible to forget. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the city. Inside, the bar carried on, unaware that tonight, the quiet waitress behind the counter would change everything. Morning sunlight never seemed to reach Ji-eun's world, even when the city outside sparkled with energy. She lived in a small rooftop room overlooking the Han River, a quiet space filled with worn books, an old radio, and the faint scent of instant coffee. Every morning, she would iron her shirt carefully, pin her name tag just right, and whisper a soft prayer before heading to work. It wasn't for good luck. It was for peace. At the bar, she was known for her patience. When office workers spilled their frustrations into their drinks, Ji-eun listened. When students forgot their wallets, she smiled and told them to pay next time. Her kindness wasn't for praise. It was a way of breathing, something that kept her from sinking too deep into her own silence. The regulars liked her, but no one really saw her. Not the owner who called her dependable. Not the young bartender who thought she was too serious. Not even the old man who came nightly just to talk. They all saw what she did, not who she was. Sometimes, when the crowd thinned and the neon lights flickered, Ji-eun would touch the silver bracelet on her wrist, engraved with a name no one knew. Her eyes would soften, filled with a grief that had long forgotten how to cry. And then she'd pull her hair back, straighten her shirt, and smile again, as if that moment of sadness had never existed. The clock had just crossed midnight when the sound of engines shattered the calm outside. 4 motorcycles roared down the narrow street, their headlights flashing against the rain-soaked windows. Inside the bar, a few customers turned to look as the door slammed open, bringing in a gust of cold wind and trouble. They were the kind of men everyone in Hongdae recognized, but no one wanted to deal with. Rough leather jackets, chains hanging loose, voices that filled the room like thunder. The leader, Dong-wook, carried himself with the kind of arrogance that demanded attention. He threw his helmet on the counter and smirked. 4 bottles of soju and something strong, he barked, slapping the table. Ji-eun nodded politely and began to serve without a word. The bikers' laughter grew louder with every drink. They told stories that ended in curses, jokes that made the crowd uneasy. Still, Ji-eun moved quietly among them, picking up glasses, refilling drinks, never flinching. But Dong-wook's eyes stayed on her. Something about her calmness bothered him. Maybe it was her refusal to react, her quiet dignity that made his noise feel small. He started teasing her, light at first, then sharper, crueler. "What's with that serious face?" he jeered, leaning close. "Smile a little. We're paying customers, aren't we?" A few people laughed nervously. Ji-eun just bowed, murmured an apology, and stepped back. That only fueled him more. By the 4th bottle, the air in the bar had shifted. His voice grew rougher, his words meaner. "You think you're better than us, huh?" He spat, eyes dark. The laughter around the room had died by now, but no one moved. Ji-eun stood frozen, holding an empty tray close to her chest. Dong-wook rose from his seat. He reached out, gripping the edge of her shirt. The moment stretched thin, like the air itself was holding its breath, and then with a sudden vicious pull, the fabric tore. The sound of tearing fabric cut through the bar like a scream. For a moment no one moved. The laughter that had been bubbling seconds ago vanished, replaced by a silence so heavy it seemed to press against every chest in the room. Ji-yoon's tray clattered to the floor, rolling against a chair leg before stopping. Her white shirt hung open, the torn threads trembling as if the air itself had frozen. Dong-wook's smirk faltered, his drunken pride flickering into confusion, because what he and everyone else saw beneath wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. Across Ji-yoon's chest, inked with careful precision, was the emblem of the Republic of Korea Army, and beneath it a single name, Han Soo-min. The letters were clean, bold, and heavy with meaning. Someone in the back gasped. Another muttered under his breath, recognizing what the tattoo meant. Ji-yoon stood still, breathing steadily, eyes locked on Dong-wook's. Her face didn't twist in anger or embarrassment. She was calm, heartbreakingly calm. Dong-wook took a step back. The echo of his own cruelty caught up to him, and his voice failed. The other bikers lowered their eyes, suddenly unsure of themselves. Even the bartender stopped wiping the counter. In that silence, the entire bar seemed to understand. This woman wasn't just a waitress. She had carried a uniform once, carried a rifle, carried a loss so deep it was written on her skin. No one laughed again that night. Years ago, before the quiet bar and the silver bracelet, Ji-yoon had worn a soldier's uniform. She was barely 20 when she enlisted, her hair cropped short, her face too young to carry the weight she soon would. She wasn't looking for glory, she was running from loneliness, from the kind of emptiness that Seoul's bright lights could never fill. In the military, she met Han Soo-min. He was her senior, her mentor, the one who taught her how to march, how to aim, and how to laugh again. They shared long nights in freezing rain, trading stories about what they'd do when they got out. He wanted to open a small cafe by the sea. She wanted to see her mother smile without worry, but one winter patrol changed everything. Their unit was caught in an ambush along the border. Chaos erupted, shouting, gunfire, the sting of cold air and fear. Ji-yoon remembered diving for cover, hearing Soo-min's voice shouting her name, then the explosion that ended it all. When she crawled toward him, it was already too late. His last words were a whisper. "Live, Ji-yoon." After the service, she returned to Seoul, carrying his name etched across her chest. The tattoo wasn't for pride, it was a promise, a way of never letting him fade. But the city didn't care about soldiers. People looked past her uniform, past her pain. So she folded that chapter away, traded her medals for aprons, her silence for small smiles. Every night she worked, she told herself she was living, like Soo-min had asked. But some nights, when she looked out at the Han River, she wasn't sure if she really was. The air inside the bar felt colder than before. No one dared move, no one dared speak. The only sound came from the faint hum of the old refrigerator in the corner, buzzing like it too was afraid to break the silence. Ji-yoon stood still for a few seconds, eyes steady, the torn edges of her shirt trembling softly against her skin. Then, without a word, she reached for the cloth napkin on the counter, buttoned what was left of her shirt, and quietly picked up the tray from the floor. Dong-wook stepped back, his face pale under the flickering neon light. The alcohol that had made him bold now made him sick. His friends shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet Ji-yoon's eyes. The weight of their laughter, their mockery, hung over them like shame they couldn't wash off. One of the older regulars, a man who had served years ago, stood up slowly, bowed his head toward Ji-yoon and whispered, "Thank you for your service." His voice cracked slightly, but the words echoed louder than any apology could. Ji-yoon paused, gave him a faint nod, and turned back to the counter. She started pouring drinks again, calm and composed, as if the world hadn't just witnessed something sacred. That quiet strength, the kind that didn't demand respect but commanded it, filled the entire room. Dong-wook muttered something under his breath and walked out, his boots heavy against the wet pavement outside. The rest of the bikers followed, one by one, their swagger gone. When the door closed, the bar remained silent for a long while. Then slowly, people began to raise their glasses, not in celebration, but in quiet respect. That night, no one saw Ji-yoon as a waitress. They saw her as someone who had carried the kind of courage most could only imagine. By the next morning, the story had already begun to travel through the winding streets of Hongdae. Customers whispered it to each other at breakfast stalls. The waitress with the soldier's tattoo, the woman who stood tall after being humiliated. No one could quite describe her expression. But everyone agreed on one thing. She hadn't needed to say a single word to silence an entire room. Over the next few days, familiar faces began showing up at the bar. Not for the drinks, but for Ji-yoon. The same people who once ignored her now greeted her with quiet respect. The office workers who came nightly started leaving larger tips without explanation. Someone even sent a small bouquet of white lilies with a note that read, "For your courage." The owner noticed too. He didn't ask about the tattoo, but his tone softened when he spoke to her. Even the young bartender, once careless, now made sure to help her close up, wiping every counter twice. Dong-wook never returned. Some said he left Seoul, others that he sold his bike. But those who had been there that night carried the memory like a lesson, carved deep into their conscience. A reminder that some people wear their battles beneath the skin, and that mocking them is the same as mocking survival itself. Ji-yoon, as always, said nothing. She simply kept working, her movements quiet, graceful, unchanged. Yet something about her presence now carried weight, the kind that made even strangers stand a little straighter in her presence. Weeks turned into months, and life in Hongdae went on. The lights still flickered, the music still played, and new faces came and went. But those who had seen Ji-yoon that night never forgot her. To them, she became something larger than a memory, a quiet reminder that real strength doesn't shout, it simply endures. Sometimes when she walked home after closing, she'd pause on the bridge overlooking the Han River. The city's reflection shimmered beneath her feet. The same river that had once carried her tears and promises. She would touch the silver bracelet on her wrist, trace Sumin's name and whisper softly, "I'm still living." Then she'd smile, not because the pain was gone, but because she'd learned to live beside it. They say Seoul never sleeps, but Ji-yoon had learned that even in a city that moves too fast, kindness still lingers. The people who once overlooked her now greeted her with warmth. The regulars who once teased her now respected the silence she carried. She never asked for recognition. Her dignity was enough. If this story touched your heart, take a moment before you scroll away. Somewhere near you, someone like Ji-yoon is fighting a battle you can't see. Be kind, respect quietly. But tell us in the comments, what part of Ji-yoon's story moved you the most? Like, share, and subscribe to keep stories of courage and compassion alive. Sometimes the strongest hearts beat the quietest, and sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who teach us how to truly see.